It all began in London. Like the first slimy newt crawling out of the muddy pond, London was emerging as a civilization. With its evolution brought problems. In order to survive as a civilized society that looked after its population, the rulers of this nation had to establish order. As the population grew, space became at a premium, and houses saw story piled on top of story. By the end of the Middle Ages, tall jetted timber houses overhung narrow streets with thatched roofs. The Mayor of London devised a system whereby carpenters and masons advised judges on matters relating to building. Issues like light being blocked by a neighbour's extension, or party wall disagreements, and misplaced guttering systems were all commonplace. This system ran from roughly 1301 right up until 1691, and the judgments and rulings are still preserved in our archives to this day. 1666 saw the Great Fire of London. This wiped out 80% of the city, and the disaster led to the London Building Act of 1667. This was the first act to provide surveyors to enforce the regulations. It specified materials what could be used in constructing buildings, and the number of stories and how thick the walls could be were clearly specified in their regulations. Other cities soon adopted the London Building Act as a template for their own building acts, and in the 18th century, building control was starting to be established throughout the country. The London Building Act was revised in 1930, and powers were granted to make bylaws. The bylaws related to matters like means of escape and other matters relating to the construction. A lot of these bylaws had been covered in previous acts, but now became law. The only issue was that local authorities weren't obliged to adopt them, and many didn't. So in 1936, the Public Health Act was amended by the 1961 Public Health Act to permit the making of one set of building regulations to replace the 14,000 sets of local bylaws. The first building regulations for England and Wales were made in 1965, and these were regulations extended throughout England and Wales. The regulations were soon updated to incorporate part of the Fire Precautions Act 1971 to include means of escape in fire. These are some of the events leading to the building regulations that we have today. In 1934, the Home Office introduced a manual of safety requirements in theatres and other places of public entertainment. This followed a history of disasters around the world. One of these disasters was in 1887 at the Theatre Royal in Exeter. A naked flame from a gas fire set fire to drapes. Over 800 people were in the audience, of which 186 of them died. In Edinburgh, a similar fire occurred in a theatre, and although 10 of the performers and stage staff died, an audience of over 3,000 people successfully evacuated the building in less than 2.5 minutes. As a direct result of this successful evacuation during a fire, an amending regulation was introduced, the Cinematograph Act 1909. The Eastwood Mills Fire of 1956 led to the deaths of 8 people. In amongst the dead was a girl aged 16. An investigation was carried out in which soon became obvious that there were no means of escape for the victims. The only means of escape would have been a staircase that was predominantly made of wood, and at the bottom of the stairs was a door that was securely locked. In 1959, an amendment was made to the Factories Act 1937. This made it necessary for the owners of factories to provide fire alarms as well as an adequate means of escape. It also gave the fire brigade the powers to inspect factories for fire safety. In 1961, the Factories Act was rewritten to include the original documents, both of the amendments, and this became the Factories Act 1961. It requires the fire brigade to issue fire certificates to factories and keep up-to-date records relating to means of escape, providing for firefighters and structural fire protection, as well as an early warning system, which could be a fire alarm or a smoke alarm. 1963 brought about changes to the Officers' Shops and Railways Premises Act. This was closely modelled on the 1961 Factories Act we've just talked about. These changes were on the back of the fire at William Henderson's and Sons department store in Liverpool. 10 people were trapped on a ledge of a 4-storey building. One man fell to his death while helping others to safety. 11 people died altogether. In 1961, Bill Bohannon converted the upper disused floors of a warehouse building in the centre of Bolton into a nightclub. The factory below was manufacturing prefabricated kitchens and was full of solvents and highly flammable materials. The local fire brigade issued the club with a warning letter warning them of the inadequate escape routes and lack of emergency exits. A fire occurred at the top storey of the club in Bolton. 19 people died in the fire. 5 of these people were killed attempting to jump into the canal at the side of the building to safety. Owner of the club, Bill Bohannon, lost his wife in the fire, making him a widower and a single parent to a 6-year-old son Barry at the age of 32. This tragedy brought about the Licensing Act 1961, which enabled firefighters to have greater powers to force fire safety on club premises. In 1969, 11 people died and a number of other people were injured trying to escape a fire at the Rose and Crown Hotel in Saffron Walden. This is one of a number of fires which sparked the Fires Precaution Act 1971, and in 1972 hotels and boarding houses were required to have fire certificates under the Act. A fire on Bradford City's football ground where a stadium set on fire and 56 people died in 1985 saw changes made to the Sports Ground Act 1975. The changes were introduced and the Fire Safety and Safety Places of Sport Act 1987 and a revised version of the Home Office Guide to Safety at Sports Grounds was issued. In 1979, a fire broke out in a Woolworths department store in Manchester. The fire burnt at over 700 degrees C, releasing a deadly cyanide gas which a single breath was enough to kill. 10 people died and 47 people were taken to hospital with serious injuries. As the fire brigade tried to rescue people from the store, it quickly realised that there were bars on the windows and security exits had been locked shut to stop shoplifters. An inquiry heard that the building met all relevant legal requirements at the time, and the casualty rate was so high, partly because of the polyurethane foam used in the furnishings, and partly because of the failure for the fire alarms. Also, the behaviour of people within the building contributed. In 1988, legislation was passed on the heels of the fire, placing a ban on polyurethane foams in home furnishings. It also led to research in the development of sprinkler systems. The latest research by the Department of Trade and Industry estimates that between 1988 and 2000, the regulations have saved at least 3,000 lives and prevented more than 30,000 injuries. In 1987, at the King's Cross Underground Railway Station, 31 people died. The fire was blamed on a lit match being dropped into a wooden escalator. Staff on the underground were given very little training to deal with fires and evacuations. The investigation brought about the Fire Precautions Regulations 1989, and these were made under Section 12 of the 1971 Fire Precautions Act. These regulations specified that escalators were no longer allowed to be constructed using wood, and regular maintenance and cleaning must be carried out on escalators.